Chapter 1. The Door to Life. The morning sun stretched across the Texas fields, painting each small house scattered along the village road in golden hues. In this quiet suburb, life passed by slowly and peacefully, like a tranquil countryside painting. Emily Callahan, a 24-year-old woman, lived here with her father, Robert, the person she considered her entire world. Emily wasn't someone with grand ambitions. To her, happiness was simple. Waking up each morning in their small house, cooking breakfast for her father, and cycling to the cafe in the town center. She worked part-time at Maple Brew, a small cafe run by an elderly couple. Though the income wasn't much, Emily loved the job. She enjoyed the morning bustle, familiar faces of regular customers, and the sweet aroma of coffee filling the air. Since losing her mother in a car accident when she was only 12, Robert became Emily's sole support. A former mechanic, his hands were rough and calloused, but always gentle when placed on her shoulders. Despite their modest life, the two lived in a small white house, where roses planted by her mother still bloomed in the garden. "We'll repaint the fence this weekend," Robert often said as they sat on the porch in the afternoons. But with his busy work schedule and declining health, those little plans always remained unfinished. Everything happened on what seemed like an ordinary morning. Emily was about to leave for the cafe when she heard a loud thud from the living room. Rushing downstairs, she found her father collapsed on the floor, his trembling hand clutching his chest. "Dad!" Emily screamed, frantically shaking him. At that moment, fear engulfed her completely. The ambulance arrived in time, but the image of her father lying motionless on the stark white hospital bed haunted her for days. The elderly doctor looked at Emily with sympathetic eyes. "Your father needs immediate heart surgery. Otherwise, it could be very dangerous." Emily clenched her hands tightly. "How much will it cost?" He slowly gave her a figure that left Emily stunned. The amount was far beyond her reach. Even working for an entire year wouldn't come close. That night, Emily sat in the hospital room, gazing at her father through the glass window. Robert was still asleep, his face pale and thinner than ever. She recalled the times he worked tirelessly under the scorching sun, sweat dripping from his forehead. Yet he smiled and said, "As long as you're happy, I'm happy too." Now as he fought for his life, Emily felt more helpless than ever. Emily threw herself into work, taking on evening shifts at a small restaurant. She contacted friends and even borrowed money, but the amount she gathered was still insufficient. Looking around their small home, each familiar item reminded her of family, of her mother and father. But now everything seemed on the verge of breaking apart. Late at night, Emily sat on the old chair outside the porch, gazing at the distant sky. The cold wind brushed through her long hair, carrying with it a heavy loneliness in her chest. "Maybe I'll have to sell this house," she quietly thought, knowing how difficult that decision would be. But for her father's sake, Emily was willing to sacrifice everything. However, just when she thought she had reached a dead end, a new door opened, in a way Emily had never anticipated. Welcome to today's story. Let us know which city you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to never miss meaningful stories. Chapter 2. The Billionaire's Proposal. The Texas summer heat scorched every corner of the small town where Emily worked. Inside Maple Brew, the cafe's ceiling fans spun slowly, struggling to dispel the stifling warmth seeping through the wooden doors. Emily stood behind the counter, wiping crystal-clear glasses, her eyes glancing out the window. The cafe door jingled softly as a man entered. He wore an elegant gray suit, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, exuding an air of authority. He took a seat at the corner table by the window, ordered an espresso, and immersed himself in the newspaper. Who is he? Emily wondered. In this small town, strangers like him rarely appeared. A few minutes later, as she brought his coffee to the table, Emily caught the man's piercing gaze studying her. His eyes weren't those of a casual passerby. They seemed to evaluate her carefully. "You must be Emily," he said in a deep, steady voice. Emily blinked, slightly startled. "Yes, sir. But how do you know my name?" The man set down his newspaper and offered a faint smile. "I've heard about you, a hard-working girl taking care of her father." Emily nodded, forcing a polite smile. "My father isn't well. I just do what I can. After a moment of silence, the man continued. I'm Richard Callahan. Emily's breath caught. Richard Callahan. That name was well known around town. He was the chairman of Callahan Industries, one of the most renowned billionaires in the region. The Callahan family owned skyscrapers in New York and luxury resorts across the country. I've heard of you, Emily replied softly, feeling the conversation take an unusual turn. Richard took a sip of his coffee, his gaze softening. Your father needs surgery, doesn't he? Emily froze, surprised that he knew so much about her situation. She hesitated, placing her hands on the counter as if to hide her anxiety. Yes, but that's a family matter. I'll manage, she said firmly. Richard shook his head. I can help you. Emily lifted her eyes to him, startled and full of doubt. Why would you help me? We don't even know each other. Richard smiled again, but this time there was calculation in his eyes, subtle yet unmistakable. You're right. I don't help without reason, he said, pausing for a moment. His sharp gaze met hers. I have a condition. If you agree, I will cover all your father's medical expenses. Emily's heart tightened at his words. What condition? Richard intertwined his fingers, his tone calm but heavy, making the entire room feel still. You will marry my son. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Emily's eyes widened in shock at the unexpected proposal. Are you joking? Emily let out a dry laugh, thinking it was a strange joke from a powerful man. I'm very serious. Richard Callahan set his cup down, his expression unwavering. My son, Alex, is 28, but has no one by his side. He's been mute since childhood and lives isolated in our family estate. Alex needs a wife, someone to accompany him. Emily's chest tightened as she listened to Alex's story. But I've never met him. This is all too sudden, she stammered. Richard nodded, his expression unchanged. I understand. You don't need to love Alex right now. Just marry him. Time will make things feel more natural. Emily lowered her gaze, feeling conflicted. She knew this wasn't a decision to take lightly. I'm sorry, but I don't think I can accept this proposal, she replied, her voice resolute. Richard showed no surprise. He stood buttoning his jacket, his eyes lingering on Emily. There's no need to answer immediately. Think carefully. Sometimes we must make sacrifices to protect the ones we love. As Richard left the cafe, Emily stood motionless behind the counter, her mind in turmoil. Emily tried to push the conversation with Richard to the back of her mind and continued her work. But each time she saw her father lying in the hospital bed, growing weaker by the day, Richard's words echoed louder in her thoughts. She stood outside the hospital room, watching her father sleep. His face bore deep lines of age and illness. What should I do, Dad? Emily whispered, her eyes welling up. That night, as the town lay quiet under the stars, Emily sat at her desk, pen trembling in her hand. Finally, she wrote a short letter to Richard Callahan. I agree. Chapter 3, A Loveless Marriage. That morning, the sky was gray, mirroring Emily's emotions. A black limousine pulled up in front of the Callahan estate, where a simple wedding ceremony between her and Alex Callahan, a man she had never met before, was about to take place. There was no lavish wedding dress, no rose petals lining the aisle, just a modest ceremony in the garden behind the estate. Apart from Richard Callahan and a few close associates, there wasn't a single guest from Emily's side. She walked slowly in a plain white dress, holding a bouquet of white lilies prepared by the housekeeper. Everything was happening too fast. Emily felt like an actress in a play whose script had long been written. Alex stood under the large oak tree waiting for her. He was tall and well-built, his black suit tailored to perfection. His face was handsome, with sharp features, but his eyes were empty and distant. As Emily approached, Alex gave a slight nod, as if greeting her. No words, no smile. The officiant recited the vows and Alex simply nodded when it was his turn to agree. When Emily's turn came, she gripped the bouquet tightly. I do, she whispered. Alex gently slid a platinum ring onto her finger. His hands were warm but trembled slightly, as if he too was facing a great challenge. When the ceremony ended, Alex walked away without a word, leaving Emily standing alone in the vast and silent garden. The Callahan estate was grand and magnificent, but to Emily it felt more like a cold palace, devoid of the warmth of a home. The long hallways with polished wooden floors, high ceilings, and antique paintings were beautiful yet distant. Emily's bedroom was at the end of the second-floor corridor, while Alex's room was across from hers. They lived under the same roof, but rarely crossed paths. Alex barely communicated with her directly. Whenever he needed to say something, he left small notes or wrote on a whiteboard in the living room. "Do you prefer tea or coffee? Would you like to walk in the garden this afternoon?" Simple, brief questions, but they never led to further conversation. Emily felt like an uninvited guest in her new home. There were times she sat alone in the living room, staring out at the expansive garden, feeling empty. She began to wonder if she had made the right decision. This isn't a real marriage, she thought. But every time she thought of her father, Emily reminded herself that she had no other choice. Though Alex said little, Emily gradually noticed the small but meaningful gestures from him. One morning, as Emily opened her door, she found a cup of hot tea placed at the threshold. She picked it up and saw a small note on the tray. "Good morning. Have a nice day." Emily glanced around, but the hallway was empty. Alex had already left. That evening, Emily struggled to open the stuck door of the living room. As she wrestled with it, Alex appeared behind her, gently placing his hand on the door and helping her push it open. She turned around and whispered, "Thank you." Alex simply nodded and walked away without saying a word. Over time, Emily realized Alex always appeared whenever she needed help, even if he never spoke. One evening, heavy rain poured down. Emily stood outside the porch, waiting for the rain to subside before heading back to her room. Alex approached from behind, quietly opening a large umbrella and holding it over her. They stood side by side in silence, listening to the raindrops patter against the ground. Emily glanced at him. Alex's face was calm, his eyes distant, as if chasing after some memory. At that moment, Emily realized she might have been wrong to think of Alex as cold. Beneath his quiet exterior was a sensitive soul. He simply hadn't found someone to share it with. One day, as Emily tended to the potted flowers in the garden, the living room door creaked open. Alex stepped out, holding an old book. He handed it to her with a soft smile, the first she had seen since their marriage. "This is my favorite book. I think you'll like it," he wrote. Emily accepted the book, her heart skipping slightly. As she read the first few pages, she realized the book was about love, patience, and understanding. Perhaps Alex was trying to tell her something, not through words, but through his heart. Chapter 4. Signs of Love. Autumn gently settled over the expansive gardens of the Callahan estate, tinting the leaves in hues of gold. Emily gradually grew accustomed to the quiet, steady rhythm of life within the house. Alex remained a silent figure, but his presence no longer felt as distant as it once had. One late afternoon, Alex quietly placed a note on the kitchen table. "Follow me." Emily glanced at the paper in surprise, but silently followed him. Alex led her through the long hallways of the estate, stopping in front of a large wooden door. As it creaked open, Emily's eyes widened at the sight before her. An enormous library, filled with thousands of books neatly arranged on towering shelves. The afternoon sunlight streamed through tall glass windows, casting a golden glow on the pages. Alex walked to the long table in the center of the room and took a seat. He pulled out a chair for Emily, offering a soft smile that seemed to say, "Let's read together." Emily selected a classic novel and began reading. Whenever she came across something intriguing, she jotted it down on a small piece of paper and slid it toward Alex. His eyes lit up as he read her notes, replying with brief but thoughtful responses. For hours, they immersed themselves in the world of words. Emily realized that Alex was not just a quiet man, but one of great intellect and depth. From that day forward, the library became their meeting place. Though they exchanged few words, an invisible bond began to form between them. One crisp autumn morning, Emily decided to cook dinner for Alex. Since arriving at the estate, she had never prepared a meal for him. Unsure of his preferences, she chose to make a traditional stew her father loved. When Alex entered the dining room, he paused by the table, his eyes reflecting surprise. Emily pulled out a chair for him and said softly, "I hope you like it." Alex smiled faintly, a gesture of gratitude. He ate slowly, and when the meal ended, He quietly wrote on a small piece of paper, "Thank you, it was delicious." That evening, they sat outside on the porch, gazing at the stars that dotted the Texas sky. Emily began to share stories of her childhood, days spent with her parents, planting roses with her mother, and watching her father repair cars under the sun. Alex listened attentively, nodding occasionally. Though he couldn't speak, his eyes conveyed a deep understanding and empathy that needed no words. One evening, as a sudden downpour drenched the gardens, Emily decided to take a walk to clear her mind. But as darkness fell and the winding paths blurred in the rain, she found herself lost within the estate grounds. Standing beneath a tree, her thin dress soaked through, Emily shivered. At that moment, Alex appeared, silently holding an umbrella over her. Without a word, he pulled her close and guided her back to the estate. Under the porch, Alex shielded Emily with the umbrella, while allowing himself to be drenched by the rain. Emily glanced down at their intertwined hands, warmth radiating from Alex's grasp. "You'll catch a cold," Emily whispered, but Alex shook his head lightly, reassuring her with his calm presence. As the rain subsided, they remained standing there, quietly watching droplets fall from the edge of the roof. For the first time, Emily felt her heart stir with unfamiliar emotions. That night, as she lay in bed, Emily reflected on the moments they had shared. Alex's silence was no longer intimidating, but comforting, a quiet strength that made her feel safe. Perhaps, she thought, love didn't always need words. Sometimes it could blossom in the smallest gestures, a note on the kitchen table, a shared book, or the gentle shelter of an umbrella in the rain. Chapter 5. A Disturbance. The Return of the Past. As Emily and Alex grew closer, their quiet but meaningful connection began to feel like the foundation of something deeper. Yet the fragile peace between them was shattered by the return of someone from Alex's past. Claire Donovan, Alex's former lover, arrived at the Callahan estate one morning. She was a striking woman with flowing blonde hair and piercing eyes, carrying herself with the grace and confidence of someone who knew exactly how much attention she drew. Claire had once shared a deep relationship with Alex before he withdrew from the world. As she stepped into the living room, Claire's gaze swept over Emily, assessing her from head to toe. A faint smirk curled at the corner of her lips. "You're Alex's wife?" Claire said with a soft, mocking laugh. "How unexpected. I thought this marriage was nothing more than a transaction." Emily felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she steadied herself, refusing to let Claire's words shake her composure. Richard Callahan sat nearby, silently observing the conversation, his expression unreadable. Claire made no effort to hide her intentions. It was clear she had returned with hopes of rekindling her relationship with Alex. "Alex and I were very happy once," Claire continued, her gaze sharp and deliberate. "I've known him for years. Do you really think you can understand him?" That evening, Emily sat alone in her room, her heart weighed down by doubt. She couldn't deny the bond that once existed between Alex and Claire. There was history between them, something she and Alex hadn't yet built. A folded note lay at the foot of Emily's door when she awoke. She recognized Alex's neat handwriting immediately. "Don't worry about Claire. I choose to be with you." Emily traced her fingers over the words, a small smile tugging at her lips. But even as reassurance settled into her heart, uncertainty lingered at the edges of her thoughts. She knew that the love between her and Alex was still delicate, something fragile and new. Yet as she held the note close, Emily reminded herself that some things didn't need to be spoken aloud. Sometimes all that mattered was that two hearts beat in quiet harmony. Chapter 6. The Surgery and an Emotional Turning Point. The sun had just risen, casting a faint warmth over the chilly winter morning. Emily sat outside the operating room, her hands clasped together tightly, eyes fixed on the stark white doors ahead. Inside, her father, Robert, was undergoing the heart surgery she had fought so hard to arrange for over the past months. A few seats away, Alex sat quietly, his eyes filled with concern, even though he uttered no words. When the doors finally swung open, Emily sprang to her feet. The elderly doctor stepped out, his kind face breaking into a gentle smile. "The surgery was successful. Your father will recover gradually. He just needs care and monitoring." Emily's hands fell to her sides, as though the weight she had been carrying for so long had suddenly lifted. Her eyes welled up, unable to contain the overwhelming joy rising within her. "Thank you. Thank you so much." She turned to Alex, her eyes bright with relief, but he simply nodded softly, his lips curving into a faint smile. Emily helped her father pack his belongings, preparing to take him back to their small house in Texas. The Callahan estate felt quieter than usual. Alex stood by the gate early that morning, watching as Emily and her father left. He didn't approach. Instead, he stood at a distance, silently following them with his gaze. Before stepping into the car, Emily glanced back, meeting Alex's eyes for a brief moment. "Thank you for everything," she said, her voice soft but laden with emotion. Alex gave a small nod in response. Emily devoted all her time to caring for her father, but a strange emptiness began to grow within her. The absence of Alex's quiet gestures, the tea placed outside her door, the careful notes he used to leave, the way he shielded her with an umbrella on rainy days, left an undeniable void. She found herself thinking about the library at the Callahan estate, the place where they used to sit in silence, reading together. She remembered the tenderness in Alex's eyes as he listened to her stories about her mother and childhood. And then Emily realized that what she had left behind wasn't just a loveless marriage. It was a man who had quietly found his way into her heart without her even noticing. One afternoon, Emily received a letter from Alex. The envelope was plain, and inside was a simple sheet of paper bearing his familiar handwriting. "Emily, now that your father has recovered, I feel I no longer have a reason to keep you at the estate. You are free to choose your own path. If you wish to leave, I won't stop you. I only hope that you find the happiness you deserve. Alex." Emily held the paper tightly, but what caught her attention wasn't the words. It was the faint smudge at the corner of the page, as if Alex had hesitated for a long time before sending it. Her hands trembled slightly. Though the words in the letter were calm and composed, Emily could feel the quiet sorrow woven into every line. She sat in silence for a long time, the letter resting gently in her lap. The next afternoon, Emily stood in front of the Callahan estate, hesitating for a brief moment. She could walk away, return to her old life, a peaceful existence by her father's side, free from the complications that this marriage had brought. But her feet refused to move forward. When Emily finally lifted her head, the estate's large doors slowly creaked open. Alex stood there, his eyes widening in surprise at the sight of her. "You don't need to write me any more letters," Emily said softly, her voice trembling slightly. Alex gazed at her, his eyes filled with unspoken questions. She stepped closer, wrapping her arms around him, pressing her head against his shoulder to feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, the quiet heartbeat of the man she had come to love. "You don't need to say anything," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "I understand everything now." For a moment, Alex stiffened in surprise, but then his arms gently enveloped her, pulling her close. For the first time, no words or small notes were necessary. The warmth of their embrace and the synchronized beating of their hearts spoke louder than any letter could. And for the first time in his life, Alex no longer felt alone. Chapter 7. True Love. Spring filled the Callahan estate's small garden with vibrant blooms. The white roses Emily had planted herself began to blossom, their fragrance drifting gently through the air. She stood by the porch, softly running her hand over her stomach, where a tiny life was beginning to grow. Alex was in the garden, carefully repairing the wooden swing. His eyes were focused, but every so often, he glanced toward Emily. Ever since he found out about the pregnancy, Alex had barely left her side. Each morning, beside Emily's familiar cup of hot tea, Alex would leave small notes. "How are you feeling today? Don't forget your vitamins. I'll start fixing the baby's room." Emily smiled tenderly each time she read his words. Alex couldn't speak, but through his every gesture and the delicate strokes of his handwriting, she felt his love and care, not only for her, but also for the child they were awaiting. One afternoon, Emily sat on a wooden chair in the library, watching Alex paint the small room next to their bedroom. He placed children's books on the shelves, hung a wind chime by the window, and quietly admired the room as if imagining the day their child would arrive. When Emily stepped inside, Alex turned around holding a small piece of paper. "I want this room to be filled with light and peace, just like our life together." Emily said nothing. She simply walked over and embraced him, feeling the warmth of her quiet but deeply affectionate husband. Richard Callahan visited one morning. As he stepped into the house, his eyes fell on Emily, who sat gently cradling her growing belly. Richard's gaze shifted to Alex and he nodded slightly, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. "My son has finally built a family of his own," Richard said, his voice softer than usual. Alex smiled faintly and took Emily's hand. Richard approached and placed a hand on Alex's shoulder, speaking quietly, "I'm proud of you." Alex didn't respond aloud, but the gratitude and affection in his eyes spoke volumes. That evening, as the two of them sat on the porch gazing at the stars, Emily gently took Alex's hand and whispered, "I think the baby will be just like you, quiet but full of warmth." Alex leaned down and placed a soft kiss on her forehead, his eyes filled with tenderness and love. In that moment, Emily realized she had everything she could ever want: a home, a loving husband, and soon a child who was the purest symbol of the unspoken love they shared. Though Alex could not speak, he loved Emily and their child with everything he had. And for Emily, she understood that sometimes words were unnecessary. It was the heart that spoke the loudest. Thank you for following our story. How would you rate this tale from 1 to 10? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Your feedback means the world to us. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like, and share this story with others.